Welcome to our Driving Matters Vodcast series, produced by the Traffic Injury Research Foundation in partnership with cooperators. Learning to drive is such an important step towards independence, but it is a privilege that comes with a lot of responsibility. Young drivers have the highest crash risk of all age groups because of their young age and inexperience. Driver education programs are an important tool to help young people recognize risks and practice driving in a safe environment. This podcast series is designed to answer common questions about driver education submitted by teens and their parents, and share tips to help them practice driving while staying safe. Our co-hosts Karen and Kylie are sharing their experiences as a parent-teen duo going through the process.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our Traffic Injury Research Foundation Vodcast called Driving Matters. Today's episode is understanding risk factors, crash risk, and determining readiness to drive. I'd like to welcome back to the podcast my daughter Kylie, and of course President and CEO of the Traffic Injury Research Foundation, Robin Robertson. And we're welcoming back our guest expert, Police Constable Shaun Asselstine from the Toronto Police Service.
Hi, thank you very much for having me back.
Happy to have you. So we're really happy to welcome Joanne from Cooperators to this episode of our Vodcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you. In preparation to put together this 6-part Vodcast series, we polled parents and teens from across Canada. We received hundreds of questions. So thank you to everyone out there who submitted your questions on the whole learning to drive process. One of the top questions that we received was, what are the biggest risks for teens as they learn to drive on a learner's license? Robin, let's start with you.
There's been a wealth of research around young drivers and some of the important risk factors when they learn to drive. So of course, a lot of the key driving behaviors that we're talking about in this podcast series, like distraction and speed, and of course impairment, are important risk factors. But then there's other pieces to the puzzle, such as having passengers in the vehicle, and as they're learning to drive, driving at night is particularly risky.
The first question here is, why do young drivers have restrictions like one passenger in the car, nighttime and highway driving and all that?
There's the parental perspective on learning how to drive, but then there's what you are going through. What are your thoughts on when you first started to drive, on having those restrictions and how they helped or hindered?
I guess it was a bit of the back and forth with the help and hinder. At least here in BC, you can't plug in your phone to listen to music. You can't have your phone anywhere in the vehicle. But more often than not, that's one of the main ones your friends or peer group will pressure you about. Just plug in your phone. Just listen to the music. The radio sucks. Go with this. But over listening to a few songs, you don't want to ruin your license over that because it's so fragile when you're still a new driver. And then as well as let's just overload the car. It's fine. You can hunker down in the back. That's even worse. Don't do that. I guess it helps and hinders in they press you to just do it. But then also it's like, okay, it's against the law.
Shaun, when you're thinking about why teens have these restrictions, why do you think it's important from the policing perspective?
I think it's important because what happens is the more young people that are young individuals you get in the car, the more that there is going around. So there's more chatter. There's more, looking at phones, passing things around, talking, looking at different things. Like maybe they'll yell, look at the window of this, or so you have more distractions around you. You're talking to more people. Yeah, it's not that one-on-one basis anymore. You got one maybe, and you got 4 people in the car. So you start talking more to them and get more distracted that way. And then as well, they might encourage you to, just speed. Let's see how fast mom or dad's car goes. So you get that pressure as well. And some teenagers will just be like, okay, I'm going to try this out because everybody wants me to test out how fast their car can go. There's so many more dangers out there hazard wise, because your perception, even for because the fact that your street lights, you have street lights everywhere, you have lighting everywhere, but you also are going into dark areas. And when you're driving those dark areas, you might not see something coming from the side because the fact that it's not, during the day it's illuminated, it's lit. So you have to watch for so much more. And with more people in the car and the restrictions for driving, I think it's just to make sure you're getting some kind of basis driving wise and feel more comfortable before you start driving late at night into the morning, and you're not usually as fatigued at that hours.
Those are really great points about nighttime driving. So even as an adult driver, I think I talk to a lot of my peer group, and some of them are completely comfortable driving in the daytime, but nighttime less so. Nighttime and raining even less so, because it completely changes what you're looking at. So Robin, the other element of the restrictions is to do with highway driving. Why is that important?
The restrictions with respect to highway driving are really because it's one of the most riskiest tasks, simply because you're going at a much higher speed and the roads can be very busy. Driving is a complex task with the manual, the visual, and the cognitive elements. And then what we talked about as well with respect to how the unexpected can happen on the road. When you amplify all of that by going at a very, very high speed, the risk becomes high. It's really important for young drivers to learn in a protected environment, in a low risk environment, where the speeds are slower, they have less complex streets, they have more time to react. And also, one of the hardest skills for young drivers is learning to recognize and anticipate hazards and be prepared for that. Because of the complexity of highway driving and then the frequency with which the unexpected can occur, it's really important that those restrictions on young drivers as they learn to drive are adhered to, but also reinforced by parents. Peer pressure is a huge issue for young people learning to drive, and we see from research that young drivers are actually delaying license because they want to avoid the peer pressure in the vehicle. Shaun, as you said, there can be a lot going on in the car, and it's very difficult for young drivers who really still have to focus on bringing that manual, visual, and cognitive tasks together to drive safely.
Those are all really good points, Shaun and Robin, about the restrictions to do with getting your driving license. But as a parent, what about those things that aren't detailed as restrictions? For example, if you're learning to drive during the summer and then all of a sudden you hit the fall and it's the first heavy rainfall after a long dry summer and the roads are really slick, or for a number of places across Canada, you now have winter weather that you're driving in, or freezing rain. How can we as parents prepare our kids for those elements?
The driving environment's always a little bit different, and it's really important for young drivers to move from simple to more complex. So irrespective of the restrictions that are in place that have to be followed, I think it's important for parents to take an active role, one, in ensuring that those restrictions are followed, and two, to continue to touch base with your teen and do the practice driving, do the log books, and make sure that you're driving in all different types of conditions and all that wonderful weather that we get in different places across the country, so that the parent can be very much in tune with the experience that the young drivers have had and the experiences that they haven't had, knowing the first time they're going to go out in rain. Light rain would be better than torrential rain if they've never driven in rain before. For parents to really to make sure that young drivers continue to move from the simple to the complex is probably one of the most important ways to help keep them safe and ensure that the conditions that they're driving under, they're capable of managing.
Shaun, I'm just going to tweak this a little bit for you, and we'll move away from weather. What about for teens who are learning to drive where there's no road construction and they've never gone through a simple or even worse yet, a complex road construction zone, and they're looking at flag people and all of a sudden it's going from 2 lanes to alternating single lane? What are your experiences with that? And then maybe some suggestions you have for parents as well as teens to be prepared for, like Robin's mentioned before, the unexpected. Construction's happening a lot more all over Canada. So how do you know how to navigate and what to look for when you hit those construction zones?
And it's important for the parents of the individual to make sure, try to get them out there in construction areas and show them, like be with them. So you're the experienced driver with them, get them the experience to go through those type of areas and point out different things to them about, like, you got to watch out for construction workers in those areas. You might have to watch out for machinery coming across the road or coming out into the road. You have so many different things you have to watch for. You also have to make sure you're paying attention to if there is somebody directing traffic. You have to make sure that you're paying full attention to that person and see what they're telling you to do. If they're telling you to go and say, like, the light, it's at an intersection and the light's red, well, they're telling you to go for a reason. That means that they have the traffic blocked off or stopped, and they're explaining they want you to go because they want you to get through the construction area. So I think it's just important as well, just for that aspect, to get the parents out there with the children, just to say, okay, this is a construction area. We have a lot of this around here, especially in Toronto. So we have to get you have to get them accustomed to driving in those areas and stuff.
Talking about construction zones just made me think also about emergency vehicles. When you see emergency vehicles, you're at an intersection, you're stopped, and emergency vehicles are coming up behind you. Sometimes you see that drivers are unsure of what to do, where to go, how to get out of the way. So can you maybe just highlight what drivers should do in those instances? And then also, when intersection lights are out and an officer may be there directing traffic, if you can just talk about the safety issue for those first responders, but also talk about what young people need to know in terms of how to deal with those circumstances.
If an emergency vehicle is approaching you and say all lanes of traffic are stopped, you're stopped at a light, all the individuals are supposed to move over to the right if at all possible. I would suggest moving over to the right, making sure, though, if you are going into the intersection that you're doing so in the way is clear. Don't just go out. I've had cars that go straight across the intersection on a red light, and I'm like, oh no, like, so hopefully something doesn't happen, and it hasn't, thank goodness, but you just never know. I would suggest to anybody, especially new drivers and stuff, just always be aware. If you have the music playing very loud and stuff, like, just keep watching your mirrors, because especially with us coming up behind and stuff, it is really bad, even for us, for our safety, if we have to go into oncoming traffic because you're not moving over to the right and getting out of our way. But at an intersection, you just have to be safe. Please don't go through the intersection. Just try to get out of the way if you can. If you can make a right turn and go on the next street and then come back and turn around, that'd be great. We really do appreciate it, especially if we're trying to get somewhere fast. Sorry, the second question?
The safety issue for police officers when traffic lights are out and the officers in the intersection directing traffic. Can you just give us some tips in terms of how to navigate through that and make sure that our driving is safe, but also we're keeping the police officers safe as well?
At an intersection where an officer directing traffic, just always look at what the officer's doing. The officer, if the officer has his back turned to you because it might be a big intersection, just make sure, don't slowly go up if they're letting the other way go, because they might have signaled you originally to go, and then all of a sudden they're trying to figure out something else going on the other side of the intersection. So just always try to make eye contact with the officer to see what they're doing and what they're directing you to do. They might be directing you have to turn at the intersection instead of going straight through. They might be telling you that one lane stopping, the turn lane traffic stopping, and the traffic going straight through at the intersection is continuing through. So always just watch what they're doing. And if they're not going to fault you if you don't know what they're asking you to do. If you stop there, they'll eventually point to you and tell you what they want you to do or signal you to do something.
Those are all great points. And I think, in all fairness to all new young drivers out there, including you, Kylie, that is great advice. It applies across the board, whether you're a new driver or you've been driving for a few years or a few decades. I think we've all experienced when, you're the one who hears the emergency vehicle coming and you're trying to do the right thing, and the person beside you or in front of you is just completely clueless. I think the advice given is definitely an all ages, all jurisdictions advice. And it also reminded me, Kylie, I don't think I've ever actually talked to you about these scenarios in terms of, now that you're driving on your own, and you've been driving on your own for
a year and a half?
A year and a half now. Have you run into those construction zone scenarios or emergency vehicles where you're kind of you were either really happy because you knew exactly what to do and everybody else did as well, or maybe it didn't go quite so smoothly?
I have to say, more frequently I run into a fire truck or an ambulance coming up behind me with the sirens going. And even though you feel like you've read up on everything, your guardian or your parent has explained it to you, you kind of stop functioning in that initial moment, especially when it's coming up behind you and you're like, oh God.
I think that's true for drivers of all ages, and not just young drivers.
But it's you gotta kind of pull yourself together as fast as possible, okay? This truck is coming up behind me quite fast and I need to get out of the way. So what I had to do is I was in the center lane and I couldn't go forward because people were going across. So I had to make sure it was safe, check to make sure the person beside me had pushed over, but I actually had to take a right turn from the center lane and go over into a parking lot. So I felt like I was breaking all of the laws as I'm doing this.
And yet you did exactly the right thing.
Shaun, if you had one piece of advice for, and let's be honest again, not just young drivers, but everybody, when they find themselves in a situation similar to Kylie, and I've been there too, where everything kind of short circuits for a moment because there's your anxiety instantly raises, there's sirens, and sometimes you can hear the sirens, but you can't see the vehicle yet, and you're not sure, is it coming from behind me? Is it coming out from the front? Is it coming from the side? Like, depending on the infrastructure that you're in, it might be hard to identify where is the emergency vehicle coming from so you can even make the right maneuver. What would be one of the scenarios you've either experienced that you'd like to share?
I would say for everybody, just make sure you're watching your mirrors at all times. If you do hear sirens coming, it is hard sometimes to tell, right? You don't know what direction they're coming from. So just assume that it's coming towards you from somewhere. And it could be going the opposite direction, but you just got to make sure. And the big thing is a lot of people I find now don't watch their mirrors. And then a lot of people do panic. And it's hard for, especially the streets aren't made for anybody trying to get over to move out of the way for emergency vehicles. Most streets now have too much things going on in them, so you can't move over. So what happens is just try your best. I'm not going to fault you if I'm going to a call and I got my sirens on. I'm going to still have them on, but if you can't get over, I understand that. I mean, I can see that no one else is moving, so you can't get through. Don't panic. It happens. Don't get into an accident because of it. Just do your best to try to get over. And that's all we ask of anybody to do, is just try to do their best. And if just make sure anything you do, just make sure you double check, do it safely. That's all we ask.
Just before we go to the next question submitted by teens, Robin and Shaun, on a divided highway. So there's either a massive center median or there's the concrete barrier. Can you just clarify? If you're on the right side, say you're heading north and an emergency vehicle is coming south, the vehicles traveling northbound don't need to do anything, correct?
Yes, that's correct. You don't have to do anything because the emergency vehicle isn't going to be coming over towards your lanes anyway.
So a little PSA for everybody out there, if you're on a divided road or highway and there's no possible way that emergency vehicle can come across to your side, please don't suddenly slam on the brakes or take evasive maneuvers, because then you'll find yourself having emergency vehicles needing to come on your side of the highway. So Kylie, let's hear one of the next questions.
Teens asked, how will I know when I'm ready to be unsupervised?
Maybe a subcontext of that is looking at the difference between being a confident driver, which your dad and I are proud to say we feel you are, but perhaps those that maybe might move themselves a little bit from being confident to perhaps overconfident. Robin, let's start with you on this one.
The difference between being a confident driver and an overconfident driver is making sure that you're not overestimating your skills and abilities, as well as the abilities of your vehicle. And for example, many of us have safety features on our car. And for that reason, we assume that our car is safe, so we may be inclined to take more risks while driving. And we often don't understand that a lot of those safety features actually require the driver to react to do something before they're triggered. So being a confident driver means you understand your safety features and how they work and under what conditions they will work. Whereas being overconfident, you may not understand exactly how they work and you're inclined to take more risks as a result. I think for drivers to be confident is important, because you do need to be confident as a driver, but the best way to be confident is to follow the rules of the road. Take all that you've learned in driver education and those coaching sessions with your parent and guardian, and always keep that top of mind and know every time you drive it's different, and you always need to be prepared for the unexpected to occur.
So Shaun, I know you mentioned your son is only 7 years old, so you're a few years away from this scenario, but As you were talking, Robin, it reminded me of when I was younger and with my friends that were fully licensed, but they were still new drivers. And that difference between being confident and overconfident, the particular scenario that took place was the right turn on red. So there was traffic coming the other way that had the advanced left-hand turn. But my friend who was driving, instead of waiting for them to go, because I think most of us know not everybody goes into the outside lane that they're supposed to if it's a two lane. They'll just go straight over to the farthest lane if they need to turn right further ahead. But because legally she was allowed to turn right on red, she just went, which was a bit terrifying for me. And I know for the driver turning left, it was terrifying because she drove a larger car. But that scenario has stuck with me literally for decades, because it was that moment of, yes, legally you can turn right on red if there's no pedestrian and there's nobody coming from the other way. But she didn't take into account the drivers who have the advanced left-hand turn coming the other way. And that meant it just created a very anxiety-filled moment. Shaun, as you're working in intersections, have you run into scenarios like that? Or do you have any thoughts on the difference between what you're legally allowed to do at an intersection or elsewhere on the road versus what is the wise or the safe choice to make?
You are allowed to turn right, you're right, on a red light, as long as you come to a complete stop. It's like a stop sign. You got to come to a complete stop and make sure the way is safe to do so. Now, if there's traffic that has an advanced green, you are not to turn right legally. I know a lot of people do. Now, what happens is I chalk that to a lot of people don't know that the other traffic has an advanced green, because they might not, right? If your traffic, you're traveling, say, northbound, and that traffic coming southbound, you might not know they have an advanced green. So, because when they have an advanced green, they're to make their turn to the closest lane to them, and then they're to get over. So if they're trying to get over and you're turning when they're supposed to be there, then that's where we get into problems with collisions. So what happens is I just find that when you're looking at the intersection in particular, I find a lot of people, or they do they turn into the wrong lane when they turn, and they might be turning and they turn the wrong lane. And it's like, okay, well, if someone else, say, stopped at a light and was turning right, and now you've turned and now you're coming across into their lane as you're going, right? So I find that there's a lot of that, but I don't think people understand that you aren't allowed to do those type of things for safety reasons.
The difference then between being confident and being overconfident is being confident is knowing the rules of the road, knowing safe driving habits and practicing them regularly, and knowing how your vehicle reacts and responds. And always anticipating that other drivers on the road may not make the safe choice, as well as recognizing that you are going to see the unexpected. And young drivers may have an inclination to become overconfident when they do one drive in a particular route, or they drive on a highway, and then they assume that the next drive they do on the same route will be exactly the same. And that means they're really not prepared for those bad choices that other drivers make on the road.
Confident is knowing your legal rights and what you should and shouldn't do, but then knowing your safety rights, I guess. So if you have a green light and you can go across the intersection, yes, legally you go across the intersection, but if this person coming the other way is going to run the red light, you stop. Keep in mind what's best in that particular situation and safest, rather than legally I can do this, but I think that's going to hurt more if you do that.
And you and I have definitely on more than one occasion had the conversation about the difference between right-of-way versus self-preservation. And both you and your younger brother know the number one goal is keep yourself safe. And if that means allowing someone else to do something that they either aren't legally allowed to do or that they just shouldn't do, and you just let them go and do exactly that. I mean, the intersection at the mall with the advanced left-hand turn, I was really surprised and pleased you mentioned that, Shaun, about you're actually legally not allowed to do that, at least in Ontario anyways, because it is a very common behavior that we see on the road a lot, where you have the advanced left, but the drivers coming the other way will actually go ahead and proceed and take that right turn on red.
One of the things that we were talking about to do with young drivers and going through the whole process, of course, is how does insurance fit into this? What does that look like for new and young drivers? And I'm quite sure with Kylie here, my daughter at 19, looking forward to owning her own car at some point, and the first time she'll have to get insurance. One of the things that's come up is, why do young drivers have restrictions to just one passenger in the car, or nighttime or highway driving? What are the reasons behind those restrictions for young drivers, and how does it relate to insurance?
Some of the reasons for that is overall safety and experience. A lot of the common types of accidents or crashes that we see for all drivers, but in particular young drivers, is that a lot of the crashes are due to lack of experience on the road and just the time it takes to become a confident driver on the road. So we see a lot of accidents come in for nighttime driving, lots of passengers in the car, particularly when you're young and you've got your friends in the car. You see it on the insurance side of the fence where you might be getting influenced by your friends in the car. You're more likely to be distracted. We see claims come in for distracted driving, nighttime driving, and just overall even experience. When you think of weather, it takes us a long time and experience on the road before we know how much we should be slowing down when the roads are wet from heavy rainfall, or when a snowstorm comes in by surprise. It takes experience and it takes confidence on the road, and that comes with time. So that's some of the reasons for why those precautions are put in place. Is it's a stepping stone, and we all need to practice before we're prepared for those situations.
Some provinces have public insurance with the option of doing some private and otherwise, but regardless of where you live in Canada, you need to have car insurance before you drive, and obviously there's a cost that's associated with that. So do you have any suggestions or tips on how to maybe prepare for those costs when you're looking at getting your first car, and then managing those insurance costs?
First and foremost, safe driving behaviors are the number one thing you can do to help your insurance costs, because getting speeding tickets, being involved in at-fault accidents will definitely contribute to the amount of money you pay to your insurance company. But other things you can do to help with your insurance costs, you can call your insurance provider or check online to see if they offer any type of safe driving reward program for young drivers or new drivers, because many do, so there's savings there. And another thing that we really recommend, particularly if you are new car shopping or used car shopping, and if you've got to the point when you've narrowed it down to a couple choices, you can reach out to your insurance company or do a quote online to see how those different cars affect your insurance costs, because the safety ratings of different vehicles can very much play into the amount of money you pay on the insurance side. So we always recommend, if you're shopping around, call your provider or do a quote online to see what the difference is between those cars, because it might be substantial from an insurance side. Check into safe driving reward programs with your insurance company, can very much benefit, particularly for young drivers. And shop around, not just with the cars, but with your insurance costs.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We recently renewed the insurance on our Jeep, and one of the questions we were asked was to do with what kind of collision avoidance technology that it had. And I hadn't thought before about how that would factor into the insurance costs as well. And I'm guessing maybe not so much for our teen drivers, but maybe our parent listeners. Some of these questions are coming up now, and that might factor into choices they're making as well on the vehicles that they're choosing to buy, with respect to how the technology that's in that vehicle might actually have an impact on their insurance rates.
Can you talk a little bit about the way insurance costs are changing? We know ourselves doing work around the new technologies on vehicle, and there really are significant safety benefits. But at the same time, when you are involved in a collision, there's a lot of that tech that also is affected, and fixing it so that it continues to work and perform its function has really added to repair costs. So maybe if you can just comment on the role of technology in the vehicle and how it can positively affect your insurance, but how it also impacts the cost of insurance across the board. Because I think everyone across Canada, we're seeing those increases in insurance costs. And in addition to the delights of the changing weather patterns that we experience all across the country, which are certainly impacting insurers, the costs of collisions have also changed.
That's definitely something that is monitored all the time, and the technology is continuing to change. But things like the cost to repair a vehicle, even if you've been involved in a minor, maybe fender bender, can be a lot more expensive to repair than maybe it was 10 or 15 years ago, because our cars have fancier equipment than they did 10 to 15 years ago. You will see some of that, like that is part of the science that goes into the of auto insurance premiums. They take, 100 of these cars were banged up. What did it cost the insurer to repair this? And then we calculate what we need to collect in premiums to help offset that cost. As the technologies get more expensive, and even, sunroofs are now becoming like the full roof of the car, like as all those technologies advance and as we've got kind of more different and more fancy equipment inside our cars, that gets more expensive, where insurance companies need to pay more to repair. That does get taken into account when we look at insurance premium, because the how expensive it is at the end of the day is taken into account for sure.
Right. So all the more reason then to learn to drive safely from the starting point when you're a young driver, and learn to, maintain your speed at an appropriate level, to avoid distractions, to, avoid using impairing substances. All those things are even more important today for young drivers, simply because the costs do affect your insurance when you are collision involved. So can you talk about some of the top factors that you're seeing in collisions for young drivers in terms of the types of collisions? Are you seeing single vehicle, run off the road, lane crossovers? What are some of the characteristics of collisions that you're seeing?
For young drivers, when we think of the common crashes that we see, we put into the bucket of experience related or lack thereof experience. We get a lot of calls from a mom and dad, my son was pulling out of the garage and took off the side view mirror because we're still getting used to how big and powerful and the size of our car is and how much room we need to leave. And when we think of experience too, again, like the weather, when we're just driving in a snowstorm, driving in a rainstorm, it takes us time and a lot of learning before we feel pretty confident or know the cautions that we got to put in place when driving during different weather. We definitely see an influx. And driving at night for young drivers, that is a very common cause for an accident that we see come in. Again, so there's an experience piece of that, and then maybe you're driving home with friends from a party or a gathering, what have you. So you maybe have friends in the car, and that could be leading to your distraction level and getting involved in an accident. And when we say distraction, the distraction charge, you've got a cell phone in hand, a physical device. By all means, we're still seeing that happen. So please, everyone, put down the phone, because we are still seeing that happen. But the distraction of friends in the car, the distraction of maybe too loud of music with friends in the car, these are all things that we see more commonly happen with our younger, newer drivers than we do with the older, more mature, experienced drivers, for sure.
That's a good point for parents to take home, is really the importance of practicing in different conditions and making sure they're getting that experience in rain and bad weather, and getting that experience driving at night, and that parents are not only working with the driver educator to build that experience so that they're safe on the road, but also to give them an opportunity to learn about the vehicle and the different conditions of driving, and enforce those restrictions that are part and parcel of graduated driver licensing programs, because they're in place for a reason.
I think it's really important as a parent to recognize that the goal, as wonderful as your relationship might be with your teen, you're there to guide them. And like you just said, Robin, like enforcing those restrictions is not to be the bad guy. It's because, having driven for as long as we have as parents, let alone working in road safety and insurance, we are more aware of the risks. It's easier for us to do hazard detection and be aware of the hazards that are out there than a teen driver. So giving them the boundaries actually will prepare them much better to be a safer driver and avoid collisions.
However, if a collision does happen, what is the teen supposed to do? Like, what are the steps you got to take after it happens?
Yeah, great question. And we get this from new drivers to people who've been driving for 20 years but haven't had an accident. First and foremost, put safety and as the first thing that comes to your mind when you're involved in an accident for yourself, those around you, and your surroundings. Steps to take. Maybe let's say you've been involved with another vehicle. Maybe they hit you, maybe you hit them. What you want to do is take photos of the accident scene, take photos of the crash scene, exchange information with the person you've been involved in an accident with. Hold off on actually talking a lot of details with the person you've been in an accident with, though. Refrain from saying that, I'm sorry, I caused this accident. Make sure that one another is okay. Call 911 if there are any injuries, you're concerned for your safety for whatever reason. You might suspect that, this seems odd, this seems a little bit suspicious. If any of those flags hit for you, call 911, get the police and the proper people to the scene to help you. If it's a minor, maybe you smashed up bumpers and you can safely get your cars to the side of the road, do that. And then you can, if there's no serious injuries, you're not concerned for safety, you can then go to a collision reporting center if you're near one, make sure your information's exchanged, make sure you've taken photos, but you don't have to call 911 necessarily if it's a minor loss and you're not concerned with anyone's safety or injuries. Call your insurance company or get mom and dad to call the insurance company. That is also one of the first phone calls we would say to do. You probably, if you've got your pink slip or your proof of insurance in the car, whether you've got it on a mobile app or in the glove box, you should be able to find the contact information for your insurance company because they will help you with the next critical steps, like maybe you need to get a tow. Hold off on Googling any company to get you a tow. Get your insurance company to help you with some of those steps and they'll be able to guide you on what to do next there. So call for help if you need it. A safety's number one, and then report the accident, whether you need to do so as an emergency or through a collision reporting, and notify your insurance company.
Well, as a teen, if I'm in a collision with a older driver and I'm talking with the insurance, will I be taken as seriously as the older driver? Because again, with the being a teen, they can treat you like you're just a kid, but I want to know that as a teen, I'll be taken just as seriously as any other driver out there.
That's another good reason to, if you feel like you need help in that situation, call the help that you need. So whether that, you're not concerned for anyone's injuries or the safety of the accident, you can call mom and dad, call the insurance company. If you do not feel safe for whatever reason with the person that you've been involved in an accident with, call the police to get to the scene to help you out with those next steps, just so you know all the proper steps that should happen in the case of a crash do happen for you.
And Kylie, I think that's a great point because young drivers do have a higher crash risk when they are involved in a collision. The automatic assumption can be they must be at fault. So I think for young people, it's really important to do the documentation, to take those pictures, to write down what happened as quickly as possible, to make sure that you get all that detail in there to help demonstrate, what happened at the collision and what the young driver was doing at the time and what they observed on the road that, may have been factors that contributed to the collision. So I think it's a great note for young people to do their homework and to record as much of what happened as possible, just as part of that discussion to make sure that the insurer has a full set of facts.
Joanne, I was just going to say, I echo what you were saying about talking as little as possible at the collision scene. I would imagine as a young driver and a new driver, there'd be a great deal of anxiety connected to being in a first collision, fault aside. So saying as little as possible, I would imagine is better all around, but also if there are any witnesses. And if there are people around that actually saw what happened, not only exchanging information with the other driver you were involved in the collision with, but also taking a look around and seeing, was there anyone around that can corroborate what I'm saying? get their contact information.
Yeah.
And these days, of course, if you have a dash cam, that can also be really helpful to protect you and just to affirm what actually happened.
You have someone who stopped to help you out at the scene, get their information, they'll be able to help tell your side of the story too, give their perspective to it, and hopefully validate what you're saying as a young driver too. It always helps if you are able to flag down a witness or someone did stop to get their information as well.
So I think one of the final questions that might seem like a common sense one, but what is insurance? What is the purpose of vehicle insurance? How does it work?
Auto insurance at the end of the day is the insurance company, the insurance carrier collects an amount of money every month, or maybe someone pays the bill once a year, but it's collecting a little bit of money to help protect you for the risk, the bigger risk, the more expensive risk. And auto insurance, at the end of the day, our cars are valuable and our cars are getting more expensive, but the most expensive and the most invaluable thing, of course, is yourself, right? The drivers in the car, the people, can't put a price tag on that. And injuries in car accidents do happen. And when they do, it's more costly to repair a human and get a human back to pre-accident state than it is a vehicle, by all means. It is protecting for the liability that could come with if someone was distracted, they caused an accident, there is still the chance that someone could sue you for those accidents that you do cause. It's collecting money to pay, at the end of the day, to pay out for the risks that could happen.
So do you have any final thoughts for our parents and teens that are watching or listening to this episode? Any final thoughts on insurance?
And what parents and teens should be looking for from their insurance company?
Number one, I would recommend a driver training course. And again, that does come with a price tag. It's an investment for teens or their parents. But for young drivers, it is great training. It's exposure on the road. And then those are the principles that you can take when you're practicing with mom and dad and you're practicing with a guardian to reinforce the great training that you got as part of those programs. There is usually a perk that you can also get savings on the insurance costs, or doesn't always pay for the full investment of a great driver training program, but it gives a discount because it is proven to provide great experience for young drivers. So there's a reason insurance companies offer that. And the other thing that I would say to everybody is getting your driver's license, getting your first car. Super exciting milestone for every teen and everybody in their life, but take it as the great responsibility that it is. It's a privilege to be on the road. We all need to be super, super vigilant, super safe on the road, and take the responsibility that comes with driving serious, because it is serious. People get hurt, people die in car accidents. It is a massive privilege to be on the road, and we all need to treat it as such.
I think that's great advice, Joanne.
Well, I think that's a brilliant point to wrap up this episode on. Joanne, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to thank Shaun, our guest expert from the Toronto Police Service, for joining us again, and obviously Robin from the Traffic Injury Research Foundation, and Kylie. And thanks, of course, to Cooperators for sponsoring these podcast series.
Thank you for tuning in to our Driving Matters Vodcast series, produced in partnership with Cooperators. Please join us for other episodes. TURF is a registered Canadian charity with a number of free education programs about leading risks on the road, as well as ways to stay safe. They provide access to fact sheets, infographics, and blogs to download and share. Start a conversation about the reasons you choose to avoid risks on the road. To learn more and access these free resources to support safer roads, visit www.turf.ca. That's TIRF.ca. Working together, we can all help everyone get home safe every day.